Hi, I'm Keith McCullough, and I wanted to take some time to walk through some thoughts on some of Trump's most latest appointments, secretaries of different things. We have a former Secretary of Energy, Spence Abraham, to go through that with me. And I wanted to kind of go down, I guess, knock down the pins, Spence, and go through some of these names. I just wanted to start with Elaine Chao, who's, of course, the Secretary of Transportation.
Well, I served with Elaine because we were both in President George W. Bush's cabinet, where she was the labor secretary, but she's got an excellent background in transportation as well. I think she was the deputy secretary of transportation in the George H.W. Bush administration. She's obviously very well connected in Washington. Her husband, Mitch McConnell, is the Senate Majority Leader, so probably more than most members of the cabinet, she understands what happens on Capitol Hill as well as what's happening in the administration. And I think she'll be a very effective advisor to Donald Trump and his team.
Do you think there's anything, and I want to go through these one by one. We'll hit on Rick Perry, of course, Tillerson, and also go through Mr. Pruitt, but just any kind of major changes that you might foresee with Elaine, what she might bring to the table immediately, or what she might take her time with?
Well, I think what will likely be the priority for her is the often mentioned infrastructure commitments Donald Trump has made over recent months. One of his singular sort of issues in the campaign was the need to improve the infrastructure in the United States, not just in the energy sector, but with airports and roads and bridges and so on. And I think we can expect that will probably be linked to tax reform as a source of some of the funding. And if that does go forward, the Secretary of Transportation will be a very instrumental player in terms of those policies as they are both passed and implemented. So I think that probably will be her major priority as she takes office.
And how about this concept of a task force? Did you have any experience with such a thing? And I imagine the task force that was mentioned most recently has to do with infrastructure and these types of spendings.
It does. I mean, Trump's made reference to an infrastructure task force. I actually, and just by coincidence, have a lot of experience because in the very first week of the George W. Bush administration, in which I served as energy secretary, we were confronting blackouts, rolling blackouts in the state of California, and a lot of other energy problems. And the president, once he took office, decided literally day one that there was a need to have an energy task force, a multi-cabinet level task force with the Departments of Energy and Interior, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as some of the other, cabinet agencies that had pieces of energy policy connected to them. And he put Vice President Cheney in charge, and then a group of cabinet members met regularly to outline and finally develop an energy plan, which we subsequently implemented. So I think maybe that's what they have in mind here, because infrastructure affects energy, it affects the Departments of Interior and Transportation and others as well. And so I think maybe that's what he has in mind.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. How does Rick Perry fit there? Do you see this, the role as Secretary of Energy as being different this time, or is it always different? And how would that work with the task force, if at all?
Well, first, the Department of Energy tends, like a lot of departments, to have a variety of different, divisions. And depending on the world and what's going on in the world, those divisions wax and wane in their importance. So when I became secretary, the 9/11 tragedy really changed our priorities at the department. We went from a department that was looking at ways to enhance America's energy assets to a department that was worried primarily about nuclear security, and that's one of the responsibilities of the Department of Energy. I hope for Rick Perry's sake that he doesn't have to confront that kind of tragedy and work on some of those topics, that he'll be free to work on things that I think will be priorities for DOE. Otherwise, that will be the enhancement of our domestic energy production capability across the board, the improvement of the energy infrastructure so we can bring more resources to market, and an expansion of America's ability to export some of this new energy product that we are developing across the United States. And I think that Rick will be a great asset in terms of being out front in the marketing and sale of American energy products to the world.
I mean, that really is part of it. I think Rick, from my understanding, is in close touch with you. I mean, is that part of you? We have to make the sale to the world on this front. Is that a big part of picking Perry to begin with?
Well, I think Perry brings several assets. I mean, first, he was the governor of the second largest state, one of the largest economies in the world in Texas, that was a growing economy, notwithstanding national economic trends. He was governor for 14 years. So he really is a government executive capable of running a major institution like the Department of Energy. Second, he has a military background, and since a large part of the Department of Energy's activities are in the security area and working with the various divisions of the Department of Defense, the Navy in particular, he'll be on familiar turf. And then finally, as governor of Texas, he's been the governor of the most energy-rich state in America, not just in oil and gas, which we all know about, but Texas is also the largest renewable energy state, producing more wind energy than any other state in America. So he knows the energy markets, and he knows the way energy firms and companies operate, the infrastructure side, and so on. So I think he brings a lot to that table.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, the interconnectedness of it all. I mean, really, Chow on the transportation side, and you think about Rick Perry, and then Tillerson. Net. There's a lot there that goes across a lot of different planes and a lot of different industries, a lot of different risks. Certain people might argue, a lot of different opportunities. Others might argue equally, if not better. How do you think of Tillerson, relatively speaking, to maybe an unfair or a fair media brush that the establishment has painted?
Well, I think some of the criticism of him is so far off track as to kind of be, almost you feel like it's just people going through the motions. I mean, if you're the chairman and CEO of a company as large as ExxonMobil, you do business all over the globe. And when ExxonMobil got very active in Russia, which has drawn a lot of attention, it was at a time when Russia was in a very weakened condition. Their economy was reeling. There was a lot of concern that if the economy didn't get stabilized, there could be an upheaval in the country, and this is back in the early 2000s. And one of the things that was an essential ingredient in terms of stability was to build up its energy sector, and the only way that could happen was if international energy companies, not just American companies, but companies from all over the globe, were investing in the energy market in Russia. And so, of course, ExxonMobil was one of them. But I don't think that, should be a disqualifier. I mean, I think it's all circumstantial. And at the time that happened, it was a priority. But he does bring, obviously, some great credentials as a global business leader. I'm sure that there'll be criticism of him because he comes from the energy sector, and that by itself will offend some people. But I think certainly in terms of commerce and the development of America's global networking and economic growth, having his kind of perspective at the cabinet table is going to be an enhancement.
Yeah, I mean, for people like me who's not in the business of judging someone and I don't know, I'll leave that to that old establishment media with the partisanship and whatnot. But I mean, how about him I'm assuming you've been in many closed-door meetings with a guy like Tillerson. How do you see him as a statesman, just as a leader? Well,
I think, first of all, the ExxonMobil company is a very unique company. I mean, they don't, go out and select their CEOs in random fashion. In fact, I think everyone more or less has to come up through the ranks through many years of working in the company and being evaluated. And that's what he did. And he's been the CEO for quite a long time, assumed the job at a very young age, and has been not just considered one of America's strongest CEOs in the energy sector, but on an economy-wide basis, he definitely ranks at the very top of the list of respected CEOs in America. So he certainly has those sorts of skill sets, and I think they'll serve him well as Secretary of State. Some will ask whether lacking previous government experience in terms of foreign policy are important. Yes, some would say that's important, but a lot of that I think is going to end up being, the sorts of things that others in the diplomatic corps will work on, and he will be, leading that effort. I think he's got a lot of great leadership experience.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, first of all of our institutional clients, I think they're a pretty good proxy on they're largely his investor base, but B, they're bipartisan. I mean, we have Republican and Democrat clients, obviously, and from our perspective, the response there has been quite positive, if only from a leadership perspective. So that's good to hear. On the I guess the most qualitative banter you'll hear about somebody, Scott Pruitt, the EPA. I mean, not that that's a hand grenade to throw at you, but you can try to catch it.
Well, I think Pruitt will, really. I think his confirmation will be a tough go, because there's no doubt that the Environmental Protection Agency is viewed by a lot of people as being, in business to advance an agenda, regardless of who wins the election. I don't subscribe to that view, but there are a lot of people in Congress and the media who believe that only somebody who essentially embraces all of the environmental activist community's agenda should head the agency. Obviously, Scott Pruitt does not embrace that whole agenda, and he's going to challenge that agenda on a variety of fronts. So I expect his confirmation of the names we've talked about to probably be the most difficult, but he's obviously also very experienced at doing battle with EPA where he doesn't agree with them. And I think on issues that relate to the Clean Power Plan, issues that relate to some of the other rulemakings that EPA has been talking about launching in the area of carbon emissions, he's likely to take a different direction. I don't know what that direction is yet. We'll be watching closely to see. But he's certainly not going to be, this is one place where the difference between the Trump election and a Clinton election will be most clearly felt, and where I think there'll be a great deal of controversy in terms of that change in direction, because the environmental activist community will resist it strongly.
Yeah, that point I think everyone can see. That's just plainly partisan. So that's easy, and sadly you can see that. But what happens when you put them all together? I mean, you effectively have a lawyer, a big-time CEO, and a big-time governor all in the same boat here, fully loaded. Elaine hopefully can make sure that those three boys behave. But are they going to work as a team? Do you think that that's really the secret sauce here? The people who are criticizing the picks may be missing, or do you think that will not be the case, and the criticism is well founded?
Well, I think it's imperative in an administration's early days for there to be a clear set of priorities established in terms of policies that the president and his cabinet want to advance. And hopefully they will get on the same page. If they don't, then you'll run into trouble and may not be very successful. But if you're on the same page in terms of where your destination is, the chances are that boat will get there. And I think they'll have a receptive Congress for the most part. I think they have demonstrated, skill sets in, as you said, a variety of different contexts that give them a very balanced and an effective set of backgrounds to draw from. So I think you're going to see, some pretty profound change. As I mentioned, I think we're going to see a significant change on the policy toward infrastructure, especially in the energy sector. I think we're going to see a change in policy with respect to some of the carbon rules, the Clean Power Plan, and so on, that are going to likely be, moved or modified substantially from what has been out there the last few years. I think you're going to see the president trying to address some of the other energy issues that would allow America to be a very successful energy entrepreneurial country. And that means both in developing its own energy resources, but also in selling them globally. And I think those things are what they're going to try to achieve.
Yeah, it's exciting when you start to think of a team actually behaving as a team in a cohesive unit. I wonder on day one, we come back from the holidays, is Trump, you talk about getting on the same page. Do you think Trump's going to get everyone on the same page, or someone like Tillerson is going to have a major role in that, or some other answer that I certainly haven't thought of?
Well, Keith, I think first and foremost, it is important for the congressional Republican leadership and the president-elect and his team to get on the same page.
Yeah.
So they are in agreement on which matters will fall within the legislative domain in terms of taking action, and which will fall within the executive branch. Trump has a lot of latitude, if he wants to take action unilaterally on some of these issues, like some of these pipeline approvals and so on. But for tax reform, for changes in terms of healthcare reform, for infrastructure, he's obviously going to also need the support of Congress. And so I think step one, probably going on right now, is an effort on the part of their teams to figure out between the House, Senate, and White House what the priorities are going to be for congressional action. And then on the administrative side, they're going to be figuring out which areas can be acted upon either by the president or by his cabinet members without the need for congressional approval, so that they can hit the ground running. And my guess is you'll see a lot of people and a lot of agencies taking concrete action fairly quickly to either reverse some of the positions taken over the last 8 years, or to stake out new turf in new directions as a result of the outcome of the election.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess that's my last question. I mean, J.T. Taylor, as you know, our political strategist, often talks about the pecking order and the timing of different Trump initiatives, and his best guess would be, I guess, would be to start with Obamacare, repeal and replace, then it's tax reform, then there's a long list. And I wonder if you agree with that when you look at certainly these four individuals, if you think that they fit in the pecking order. Is that where they fit? It's going to come a little later than in the year as opposed to right off the bat.
Well, no, I think because, obviously if Obamacare is up first on the congressional side, then it will, it will not affect these departments so much. But on the administrative executive branch side, they could well be taking action on a variety of fronts fairly quickly where they're empowered to do so. So I think you'll see EPA, I think you'll see Department of Transportation moving fairly fast on some of these topics of importance to Trump. But again, their legislative priorities may be a little later in the year. I think with regard to the State Department and Rex Tillerson, that is a little different situation, because we have to act on the foreign policy front in both an affirmative sense, but also in reaction to things going on every day.
Yep.
So I'm sure he'll be very busy, and it won't be on Capitol Hill as much as it will be, at the UN, or in conjunction with our allies, or with NATO, or in dealing with the threats posed by Chinese entrepreneurs seeking to infringe on patent rights, or Russian business people seeking to, in one way or another, expand the impact of their energy supplies. I'm sure Tillerson will be very busy.
Yeah, or one, I said it was going to be my last question. It's not, because I'm going to ask you another one. On that front, I mean, the executive order or the initiative, or Trump just laying something down on Iran, this is another obvious concern to both energy bulls and bears alike. Joe McMoneagle and I have spent endless amount of time talking about that and what the scenario analysis might look like and the timing. What do you think about that? Is there something to bite our teeth into, and is there a team here in place that is appropriately equipped for something like that?
Well, I think that Joe McMoneagle's analyses over the last several months have been dead on in terms of the issues that pertain to both the Iran nuclear deal and OPEC and its actions. I think Trump has given signals that suggest he would be prepared to reimpose sanctions against Iran, which would have, as you know, an immediate impact on its energy export capability, which by and of itself could redress the supply equation in the marketplace. The question for Trump will be, after he is fully briefed and his own national security team is in place and briefing him, not the Obama team, And I think what's going on in the last few weeks about the intelligence community and how they've been sort of politicized in some of these discussions about the election, I think he'll wait till his own team's in place and people he can rely on are giving him insights into the ramifications of action with regard to Iran sanctions. He will then make a decision. And if he carries through on what he indicated he was likely to do, which was to reimpose sanctions, he's indicated that in the campaign, then obviously it'll have a profound impact on market supply of product. If he rethinks his position for whatever reason based on his own team's analysis of the situation, maybe he'll go in another direction. But that's one we'll be closely monitoring because it's obviously going to have implications not just for the energy markets, but for a lot of other issues as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a lot to read and react to, methinks, I guess. And thanks for all of your insight. It's going to certainly be helpful to have you on board as we try to read and react to all of it.
Yes, well, we'll do our best and appreciate the chance to share it with you whenever there's an opportunity to do so.
All right. Thanks a lot, Spence. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, Keith.